Hi, welcome to my channel, Journeys and Dreams. My name is Sam. In this video, I'm going to be sharing my green card interview experience with you. I am married to a United States citizen and I adjusted status in the United States. On the morning of my interview, it was around 8 or 8:30. We were on time, my husband and I went. We waited for an extended period to the point where we felt uncomfortable because even persons who arrived well after us went in before us. Nonetheless, we stood our ground, and by that time, we were just waiting to be interviewed because upon entering the first area, we had to show our documents and they were vetted, and then we were asked to have a seat and wait on the immigration officer who was going to interview us. Eventually, this gentleman came out and he called my name. I stood when I heard my name and began to walk towards him. My husband also stood at the same time because we anticipated that we were both going to be going with the officer to be interviewed. To my surprise, I was beckoned to sit back down. Even though I was a bit taken aback, I obeyed. I sat there while the immigration officer called my husband and they went away and he was going to be interviewed. At that point, I was not sure what to make of the situation because I've heard of various stories, various immigration interview stories, and at no point I heard about a situation where the person seeking to adjust status was not the one interviewed. So I was there thinking various things, wondering what was wrong and why was I not going to be interviewed. Just before my husband went with the officer, I gave him an envelope with documents. I had 2 envelopes with documents and the documents were together. Both our documents were there and I did not necessarily separate the documents based on my documents or his documents. Everything was piled together because I did not anticipate that we were going to be separated. So I just gave him an envelope at the appointed time, not even sure what was in that envelope, but just gave him so that he had something going in with. I waited there for, I would say, it could be about 15 minutes. And then I heard my name. When I heard my name, I was a bit confused because I'm like, who could be calling me? Who knows me from here? I didn't know anybody there. And I anticipated that my husband was going to come out of the door that he went in. To my surprise, it was my husband calling me from the opposite end of the room. And I noticed that he was with the immigration officer. So he beckoned to me to go all the way over to the side of the room where he was standing. And I was of the impression at that time that I was going to join them in the interview. Surprisingly, my husband was dismissed and I was called in. I still had the envelope with the documents and I went with the officer. He started a conversation even before we reached to the interview room. What he had asked me was if I had gotten a letter inviting me to attend an interview on the day. And I told him yes. And then in responding to him in the affirmative, he was like, okay, that shed a whole new light on things. I wasn't sure what that meant, but nonetheless, he asked if he could see the letter, and I gave it to him, and he said that he would make a copy. We went to the room, his office, where he was going to interview me. He started out by going through the I-485 document, which is the application to adjust status. He went over some questions with me, what I would have already answered on the form. I remember he asking me my parents' name. He asked about travel details, like if my husband and I had traveled within the United States. And he went over some additional questions, but the questions were all from the form. I remember at one point things got a little awkward. He asked me what my husband's middle name was. And when I told him, he repeated the name that I told him, kind of looking a bit shocked and asking me, like, as if to say, are you sure this is the right information? And I was confident and I said yes. But at a glance, where I was sitting, I was able to see the section where he was looking at on the form. And I realized that apparently he got my father's middle name mixed up as my husband. So when I told him what my husband's middle name was, he was looking at my father's name. He apparently was of the impression that I gave him an incorrect name. He looked back at the document and realized that the answer I gave was in fact correct. He went over almost the entire document with me and just asked me pretty much the same questions. I provided the same answers because, of course, they were correct answers. So regardless of when I'm asked, I would have the same response. We were there for, I would say, a good 20 minutes, and he said that he was going to submit the documents to another area and they would complete the review, and then they would contact me if they needed any additional information from me. If everything was in order, then they would proceed to prepare my green card. I was not sure whether or not my green card was going to be approved. As we were going over the form, he was asking about, details about my husband and whether or not we live together and who prepared the documents. And I told him that I was the one who prepared the documents because my husband had a very demanding job that really did not allow him much time to do anything outside of work. I told him that my husband would not have been very familiar with all the details of the documents. He had a good understanding as to what the documents meant, but in terms of all the individual questions, he did not get involved like that because time did not allow for him to get that involved. Anyway, the officer went ahead and said that in interviewing my husband, he also made mention that it was I who had completed the documents, and even though he understood what they were for, he was not intimately involved in the completion and preparation based on his busy work schedule. As we were leaving, he saw that I had an album. So he asked if he could take a look, and of course I agreed. In that moment, said he would note on my file that he saw photographs. So he walked me back to the door where I entered from. That was the end of the interview. When I reunited with my husband basically shared a sentiment wherein the immigration officer was harsh on him by letting him know that he should have been ready to be interviewed, should have had all documents with him, and be able to account for every aspect of the interview process because he was my sponsor. even though my husband explained to him that it's not a case where he didn't know what he was doing or what was happening, but he did not have the time to get intimately involved in the completion of the form. So he trusted me, his wife, to get everything up to speed and to gather supporting documents. He had a lengthy discussion with the officer. He accepted, I'm not sure if he agreed with the situation, but he accepted that because that was what the situation was. And at that point, he dismissed him. He even asked my husband about the letter, the appointment letter for the interview. And my husband was not sure about a letter, whether or not one was received. He said to him that if there is a letter, then his wife would have it, which I did. We were not able to coordinate any form of documentation to say, I will take in a copy of all the documents and then my husband will take in a copy of the same documents, because as I mentioned, we were not anticipating separation. In the end, we left not certain as to what the outcome was going to be, because needless to say, at the end of the interview, we were rattled and not sure what to really make of why they separated us. I decided that I was not going to be stressed out about the situation. I was just going to wait to hear from them and hear the outcome. When I got home, I had to log into work, so I did not think about the interview for a while. Nonetheless, after I was done with work in the evening around 6 o'clock, I decided to check to see if there was a change in the status of the case online. And when I checked, I noticed that I saw where the status was updated to say card being prepared. It was at that time that I realized that the case was approved. I had peace of mind right there, because based on all the twists and turns of the interview, I was really not sure what to make of it. I was confident about my answers, about supporting documents, about everything as it relates to what was submitted. But as I mentioned, the interview was a bit uncomfortable, especially on my husband's part. And I remember even my husband telling me afterwards that the medical that we brought to the interview, the officer asked if we had gotten any government assistance to pay for the medical. We paid for it on our own. We did not seek any assistance. And I'm wondering if we did, if that would have had a negative effect on our case. But because that was not applicable to us, I guess I would not know. All in all, that was my green card interview experience. I saw an update later on that the case was approved, and that came after seeing that the card was being prepared. But when I saw that it was approved, I would have already realized that upon seeing that the card was being prepared. It turned out to be a happy ending. The feeling after the interview was not a happy one. Even though I knew I did everything correctly, I was not sure what to make of the whole interview. So there you have it. That's my green card interview story. Thank you for watching, and catch you in the next video.